Father, we thank you for your great love towards us. We thank you for your holy Sabbath. And we pray now as we have come together that your Spirit will speak to us. May we truly understand. You've tried to tell us in so many different ways, and we still keep reverting back to our old way of thinking. Help us, Lord, to move into the real place, to understand what your kingdom of grace really is. Bless us today as we take another step. Help us to open our minds and hearts to you. May we receive your instruction. May we not hear what humans say, but only your Spirit. And we thank you for protecting us in Jesus' precious name. Amen. Last week, I want to remind you of a one-liner. Jesus can't blot out sin in heaven while we keep doing them here on earth. Now, we know that we're saved by grace through faith in Jesus and his merits alone. But there's something about works we need to understand. And we're going to start dealing with that more and more here so we see the connection. And we spent all that time talking about the merits of Jesus so we wouldn't get ourselves confused when we got here. So please, don't turn all those things off that we've been talking about. All right. The first thing we want to understand is when we do works, we are not some big light going off in the universe. We're just a little teeny reflection of light. We're the glowworm, as it were, compared to a real star. We don't really have any light except from Jesus. And we're not very good at reflecting that yet, but we want to understand that he's the light. It comes from God, it's through God, and it's to God. And that's the important part we want to do today, is what is it that goes back to God? Good works are necessary, but they are not a cause for justification. So if you can get that in your mind, they are necessary. We must have them. But they are not a cause for justification. They are not the reason we are saved. Okay? All right. So we're going to mention 4 different reasons why there is works involved at all. You know, there are a lot of people that don't think works have anything to do with it. They think all you have to do is believe. And if you just believe that Jesus saved you, you're saved, and that's that, and nothing can ever change it. Well, that can't be possibly right, because the sanctuary has 3 different places in it. The first one is justification. The second one is how a Christian lives. And the third one is a place that a Christian is sealed. So something has to be happening through there. If we were already saved, the question is this: why aren't we in heaven? It doesn't make sense if a person is saved why they shouldn't be in heaven. We can't say we're saved. We can say we have the hope of salvation in Christ. All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that. I want to get into why works are necessary. The first one is it's our duty. We are indebted to grace to have a fruit of what grace is supposed to be doing. So we are indebted to grace. The interesting thing is that a godly person, one in whom grace is operating, delights in the law. Now, I want you to see that in Romans, the 7th chapter, which is kind of a strange place to see this kind of a thing. In Romans 7, verse 22, it says, therefore I delight in the law, in the inward man. So whoever this person is in Romans 7, this person delights in the law, in the inward man. And so it's a delight to the one who understands that they're indebted to grace. In Matthew 5:19, Jesus says something very important to us. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, I hope you will remember this scripture the next time somebody tells you the law was done away with at the cross. Because this is what Jesus says about it right here. We'll go to some things after the cross also. But this statement is very important. He who teaches men to break them. Well, who is that? It's whoever tells people the law was done away with. That's one of the people. That takes in an interesting bunch of people. A lot of them claiming to be teachers of the Bible, a lot of them claiming to be leading people to Christ. But Jesus said, if they're teaching people to break the law of God, they're least. Who's least? Doesn't that mean the last? You mean Hitler is up here and they're below him? That's what it means. Stalin is up here and they're down there? That's what it means. This is a heavy scripture. How could Jesus say this kind of a thing if the law is not important? Okay.
Some people think that least in the kingdom means they're still there. They're just the lowest in the kingdom.
That's right. There are many people who believe that. But what was Jesus really saying? He was saying they are called least by those who are in the kingdom. Okay? They obviously are not going to be there if he means they're least. That's true. People get mixed up in all kinds of areas. We need to be ready to talk about these things when people bring them up. All right, so the first thing we're looking at is duty. The person who is regenerated, who is born again, and does the works that are the fruit, are doing it for a particular reason. It's not to get to heaven. Okay? Salvation is through the merits of Jesus alone. Why are they doing the works? Everything they do as a Christian is to the glory of God. Okay? That's the motivation of a born-again person, to the glory of God. We'll see that one some more when we find out how Paul deals with this concept of to the glory of God. But first, we'll do these things today. All right, the second one. Good works are necessary to show the reality of salvation. Okay? If it doesn't work, why are we all playing the game? Okay? The reality of salvation is one of the reasons there have to be works. 2 Peter 1:10. All right, Peter's telling us here, wherefore, brethren, give diligence to make your calling and election sure. For if you do these things, you shall never fall. If you give the evidence that you are born again, You are making your election sure. Now, there's a little pitfall here that we need to be warned about. People start looking around to see if they're Christians or not. And they start checking up on themselves to see how they're doing. And if they think they're doing good, they congratulate themselves. And if they're not doing good, they get all depressed. Let's see how the Bible says to do it, and do it correctly. Let's go over to Romans 8:16. The Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. So this is not a mind trip. This is not us convincing ourselves one way or the other that we're Christians or not. The Spirit of God bears witness with our spirit to tell us we are the children of God. Do you see the difference between a person just trying to figure it out and God actually bearing witness to them? A person cannot be saved without works, but the works are never a cause. Since we're in Romans 8, let's look at verse 13. Now remember, Paul is talking about Christianity here. He's probably the best theologian we have to study in the Bible. In verse 13 it says, "For if you live after the flesh, you shall die." That's kind of a strange thing to say if the way you live has nothing to do with it. There have to be laws. There has to be something that controls everything. He says it point blank, if you live after the flesh, you shall die. But if you through the Spirit mortify the deeds of the body, you shall live. In other words, we are to control our bodies. We won't deal with the word mortify right now. We'll come back to that too. Hebrews 12:14. What do italicized words mean in the King James Version? When you see those little slants. Okay, they've been added, they've been supplied, right? When you're reading the Bible, it's sometimes informative to key into those and read the text without those and see what you come up with. In this case, it says, follow peace with all, period. And holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. We see the word men supplied there. It says all. Now, he says something just in passing that we need to key into. It says, follow peace with all and holiness, without which, what?
No man shall see the Lord.
No one's going to see God without holiness. It seems to me that there must be some sort of a standard involved here. You just can't believe and all of a sudden you have everything. He says holiness here. There is a reality to what God does in the plan of salvation, and that's the second reason why he has works. The reality of that salvation must have an evidence someplace through the Spirit. All right, continuing. The reality becomes a weapon. It becomes a defense to the Christian. Let's go over to James, the 2nd chapter. Now, Luther seems to have had some difficulty reconciling some of this, but there really is no problem if we can get over to see what James was talking about. Paul and James were not at odds with each other. In James, the 2nd chapter, verse 21, it says, was not Abraham our father justified by works? Well, it sounds at first like he's saying something different from Paul, but what is he saying here? Was he not justified by works when he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar? Seest thou how faith wrought with his works? Now, what did he just say? He had faith that worked. Faith and works were together in him. Who has faith and works? The justified one. Paul was talking about a lost person when he says a person is justified by faith alone. Through the merits of Jesus alone, it's the only way it can be justified, with no works. That's a lost person who does that. James is talking about a person who already has been justified, and he shows what that person does. Their faith is exercised a different way than the faith that got them justified. This faith wrought with his works, and notice what he says. By works, faith was made perfect. So there is no such thing as a Christian that doesn't have works. Okay?
Can I interject something? Keep in mind the sort of seed analogy that we talked about last week. Imagine that you have two seedlings coming up in the garden and you don't know what they are. And someone comes to you and says, if that's a tomato, it will produce tomatoes. And if that's a pepper, it will produce peppers. So you sit there and you watch it. Now, if I say that, if that's a tomato, this must produce tomatoes, who am I saying that to? Am I telling the tomato plant that it now has a terrible burden to fulfill, that it must produce tomatoes? Am I saying that to the tomato? Is it an order to the tomato? I mean, obviously it's not. The tomato is going to bring forth tomato plants, tomatoes, so I said it backwards, right? So when God says that the Christian will and must do these things, he is not telling the Christian that he now has this obligation to do. He's telling everyone else that this is how you identify a Christian. The Christian, the one who has received life from Christ, will do those things as naturally as the tomato plant will produce the tomatoes. So when God says, thou shalt not steal, he is not telling the born-again Christian, the one who has faith in Christ, who has given his whole heart to Christ, that now he has something that's off limits he can't do. No, that person who has given his heart to Christ will not desire to steal, will not want to do it. So he's telling the whole world that a Christian does not steal, does not lie, does not kill. Okay, so when we think of these commands and the law and the works that are required, it's not telling someone now they have a burden to produce something. So you have to keep that always going back in your mind. This obedience cannot be generated by a heart that has no faith. It has to be a rebirth. Otherwise you can't make the tomatoes that are commanded by God.
So are you saying basically then that, well, there's a verse in Psalms 85, verse 13, righteousness shall go before him and set us in the way of his steps. And then there's another one in Ephesians somewhere, or someplace, where it says, faithful is he that calleth you, who also will do it. And so we trust that the Lord will produce these works in us.
What we trust is, as it says in John, that we are born of the Spirit, not of the will of man or the will of the flesh, but of the will of God. In other words, I cannot say, okay, God, give me rebirth. It is an act of God. But when God gives me that experience, when I have mentally come to the place, and he's going to go through that, where God looks at me, remember, this is a person we're dealing with. We're not dealing with some automatic set of principles. This is a person who's looking at us and who knows us inside out and knows when we're ready to live that life. When we're ready to live that life, when we can pray the prayer of Romans 7, when we can say Romans 7, that we love the law but we can't do it, who's going to deliver me from this body of death? When we're there, God can do the miracle. The problem is that most of us haven't gotten there yet. We still want to do our thing, and that's why we do it. We want to sin, and that's why we do it. So most of us haven't even made it to Romans 7 yet. You see, haven't even made it to the place where, like the prodigal son who comes to himself and says, what am I doing here? I'm going to go back to my father. Most of us in the church still, and in the world of course, but most people haven't come to themselves yet. They're still enjoying the pig pen and like to go out for forays now and then. You see? So when the mind is ready, God does the act. When God does the act, then the heart is changed. As Ezekiel 36:26, I will give you a new heart and a new spirit, and I will cause you to walk in my statutes. That's Ephesians 10:16, Hebrews 10:16, the new covenant promise. Okay? So when God gives the new heart, he says, I will cause you to walk in my statutes. So yes, the fruits are his. We won't have to sit there and strive to let the light shine. Right?
Have you ever read the book by F.T. Wright called From Bondage to Freedom?
No.
Have you ever heard of F.T. Wright?
No. Sorry.
Somebody's got some of his writing. I don't remember who. Somebody I know. You'll have to give me his address, because this book goes through and shows how memorizing promises, eventually the promises become yours, and you no longer have to try to have faith in them because you said them so many times, they actually automatically come out that way. Does that make sense?
Except for the fact that God says that the seed has the life principle in it, and it's the Word. But she says that the seed, if you cast it into the ground, is powerless to bring forth life. It needs the act of God, personal attention, to go down there, make it come to life, to impart his life to it. So he says that the Word itself is powerless to bring forth anything in you.
That's true. I guess if you
The devil knows the Bible by heart, I guarantee you.
Right, and I'm not referring to that aspect. I'm referring to a person that is able to take that promise, and after he's internalized it, it actually becomes part of him where he actually believes it now instead of just saying it.
But if he believes
And if he
it,
really believes in it, God's going to do his thing.
if he believes it, he will believe it without it being memorized. And he'll believe it once. You see, God doesn't use the methods that he uses on brute beasts, on people. He doesn't use sheer repetition to knock things into our head. He says, believe me. And often he says to people only once. If you didn't believe it back in Moses, you're not going to believe it now. In other words, don't go repeating Moses, thinking if you don't believe it the first time.
What I have discovered is, while I agree with what you're saying as far as the approach of faith, I disagree in limiting what I'm saying. Because what I'm saying is the more promises that you get in your mind, the more of a foundation you have for faith. Because what comes out of the heart naturally flows.
I agree with you. I've done a mistake here. I shouldn't have taken this long from him. If you don't mind, either take it up with him or we can do it another time, but I'm sorry. I'm leaving him sitting here. That was my mistake. I'm sorry.
Take over or give it back to him. It's something that I discovered through that book, and it's really cool.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry.
Are you done?
Sorry, yes.
Okay. Okay. All right, let's finish reading James 2. We were at verse 23. It says, the scripture was fulfilled, which saith, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. You see then how that by works a man is justified, and not by faith only. Now, Luther had a real bad time with that verse. He could not put that with Romans. He just could not make it work. But we see that if justification is real, the works will be there that perfects the faith that brought along the justification. That's what James is telling us. All right? So there is evidence of justification. It's not just something you believe in and nothing happens. All right. So in Romans 4, just to be sure we've got this, Romans 4, verse 5. We'll just read verse 5 and 6. It says, to him that worketh not, but believeth on him that justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted for righteousness. Now, did you notice who is getting justified? It's the ungodly. Paul has no argument with James. James is talking about the godly. So there is no problem between the two of these. Notice, it says, verse 6, even as David also describes the blessedness of the man unto whom God imputeth righteousness without works, saying, blessed are they whose iniquities are forgiven. All right. At that point, they are no longer ungodly. They become godly through this process. So, justification has phases now. We can begin looking at that. Justification initially is through the merits of Jesus alone, with absolutely nothing a human can do about it except receive it through faith. Then, when they have received that justification through faith, they are now justified, but they become perfected through the works in justification. So justification is now a process in them. And when it's completed, justification is perfected, and they are sealed in that justification, but not until the end. So a person can be justified and lose it. Most of the churches don't teach that. They say once you're justified, it's it, you're saved forever. You can never lose it. But that doesn't make any kind of sense if we follow the rest of the Bible. Now, as Seventh-day Adventists, we know a little bit something about the sanctuary. When the blood was taken into the cup, what did the priest do with it? Well, he didn't drink it. All right. He did something with it that got the sin that was in that blood symbolically into the sanctuary. He either sprinkled or he put a fingerprint. He did something with the blood to get it in the sanctuary. And the sanctuary now had the problem. It had sin in it. God's holy temple had sin in it. There is sin in heaven. Your sins and my sins are there. They have been recorded. And God has to cleanse heaven and get rid of that sin. And the way He cleanses it is He cleanses it out of us first. And when it's not a problem to us, then He can take it out of heaven. Okay? Yes, we are holding up the show. We are not getting this understood. That the cleansing of the sanctuary involves us. We are the second temple. 1 Corinthians 6:19, it says, don't you know you're the temple of the Holy Spirit? In chapter 3, he says, him who defiles the temple of God, him will God destroy. God is interested in His temple. So works then are involved in all of this. Works are a comfort also. We are to comfort, to receive comfort from God in that we have some works that we recognize, but we are not to rest in them because they don't get us anything. We are to have the comfort of the works. God gives us that. But not as the cause of our salvation. That is the wrong place to be looking. Okay, now let me get to step 3. Matthew 5:16. That's a good scripture to use. We'll read the scripture first, and then I'll tell you what this has to do with works. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. Now that's Jesus talking. It can't get any better than this. Number 3, the reason we have good works is to testify to others about God. We have to have good works to glorify God. Remember, it's not to be saved. These works are necessary in the functions that we're talking about, but good works never save a person. That comes through trusting Jesus. But if we really trust Him, if we really have confidence in Him, we will obey Him the same way we trust Him. I found a statement just today in the computer. It said, loving confidence will produce loving obedience. So if we have a problem with obedience, maybe we don't trust God. We don't believe He's really saved us yet. Yeah, we're trying to get Him to like us. And you know, it'll never happen. He's never going to like us because of something we do. He loves us because He created us, period. All right, so this is an important one. It's a testimony to others. It's light. What good is light if you can't see it? Works is visible holiness.
In that text, could you replace the word good works with character?
Okay, good, sure. This really is the issue. Let me read you something since you said that. Where is the statement? I know it's right here. Oh, now my eye isn't fall. Here it is. Here it is. It's 180. What volume are we in here? Ministry of Healing, 180. Christ lived a life of perfect obedience to God's law. And in this, He set an example for every human being. The life that He lived in this world, we are to live through His power and under His instruction. This is exactly what the Bible teaches. Ellen White does not miss. She knew the real gospel. Salvation through the merits of Jesus alone. To do what? To live like Jesus. You know, this idea that we can be saved and go to heaven when we're sinning is kind of a strange idea. How many thieves do you expect to see in heaven stealing? Well, when are they going to quit? On the way there? Not going to happen. Character will be developed before Jesus comes. No one's character is going to change when we see Him coming. It's all done. The character we're going to have forever will be finished. You know, one time I was dealing with a group of people and I didn't know who everybody was. And I didn't know there was a Methodist minister sitting there. And something told me, don't talk Adventism tonight. And so I didn't. I try to listen to the voice when it tells me. I didn't talk Adventism. I talked straight Bible, no spirit of prophecy, no Adventist words, straight Bible. And I talked about Noah and the flood. And we just went through that whole story. And it kind of got him. I saw him listening, but I didn't know who he was. And when we got to the end of the story, you know how it goes. The 7 days of rain. But what happened before the rain? Well, the animals had to go in there first. We went through all of that to show how animals could do that. We got Noah's family in there, just 8 souls, that's all. We got them all in there, and then the door shut, and no human hand shut the door. This is when he started coming alive. I knew something was going on with that man. The door was shut. God shut the door. It had not rained yet. It still looked sunny. It looked beautiful. The people were still out there in their tents in the carnival atmosphere, the hot dog stands, all of the whole thing. They made a big circus out of it, you know. And when the door shut, the church elder went running back to the church to talk to the pastor about it. He said, you know, the door shut, and we don't know how he did it. God shut the door. And the pastor called a board meeting real quick. And they said, Noah, we've changed our minds. We have decided to go inside, in the boat. So here comes the church. All of a sudden they want to get in the boat. And they said, open the door, Noah. Let us in. We want to go now. He said, I can't open the door. I didn't shut it. Come on, Noah, let us in. Stop playing games. I can't open the door. It's shut forever. It's shut. And then it started to rain after a period of time. Not that day. One day went by, no rain. Another day went by, no rain. Another day went by, no rain. And everybody started to relax. Oh, he really scared us. It's not going to rain. What's rain? We never saw it before. But after the 7th day, it began to rain. Now, I want to ask you the question that reached that Methodist minister. How many days had they been dead and they didn't know it? When the door was shut. That was it. Forever. They were still alive for 7 days. The sun came up, the sun went down, the sun came up, the sun went down. They went to work. They were planning weddings. They were planning the big party. They were planning the next potluck at church. They were dead and they didn't know it. And Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. The judgment will be over. And people will still be planning their weddings. That Methodist minister came up afterwards. He looked at me. He says, I've never heard anything like that. He says, I never thought of a judgment like that. He said, but it's all Bible. It's true. He says, and I have to tell you, the only reason I listened to you, you didn't say anything about churches. You just said what the Bible said. That man was baptized, a Seventh-day Adventist. One meeting. We ought to get some of these things inside of us. This is the truth we're dealing with. And the truth is we are to somehow understand, we are to live the same way Jesus lived. The same power. What is that power? What's it called? The Spirit of God. That's what he had. He had the Spirit of God. And he did what the Spirit of God does. When we are justified through his merits, we receive the Spirit of God. For the same reason. Okay? We've got to stop believing all these little stories that we're told, oh, you can't do it. You can't stop sinning. You can't do this. You can't do that. Those are lies. And I'm going to have to tell you why we believe them in just a minute here. What leads us in those directions? I'm going to give you a warning here on this page because I'm probably never going to come back to this subject, but it hits me as I look at it. The practice of inviting men and women to relate in public the experience of their life of sin is full of danger to both speaker and hearers. Know that the next time somebody gets up to give their testimony and they tell you about the miserable things they did before they became Christians, God never told them to do that. It glorifies sin. Back away from those kinds of things when you hear it. This is on page 178, Spirit of Prophecy.
Is it okay just to say a real quick word about it, like when I was in sin or I was strayed, like a sheep or something?
Yeah, those kind of general statements are fine, but many times people go into details of the things they were doing and start describing things, and that really is bad news. The devil really enjoys that kind of a thing. That is not glorifying to God. I wasn't going to say that, but it was on this page. So.
Ministry.
All right, now, number...
Can I interrupt again?
Okay.
This is the thing with me. I'm fair on the channel.
I'm just struggling to be sure because I see the faces and I see when you react to what he says, and I don't want us to lose what we've worked on for a year, okay? When a woman conceives, she takes a cell, one of her cells, and that cell has no ability to become a human being. Right? That cell is part of her body, will never be more than that alone. Is that right?
Right.
Can any one of us here tell the difference between an egg and a chicken?
Yeah.
All of us. A child, everything. We don't have to tell the egg it must have feathers. An egg can't have feathers, right? Very huge difference. A totally irreconcilable difference between an egg and the creature it can become after it's fertilized. Okay? Irreconcilable difference. These are the difference of salvation. The lost are alone in themselves. They are a human being alone in themselves, like an ovum, like an egg. One cell alone. The saved are united with Christ, with the Holy Spirit as their Father, just like Christ. Okay? United in that way, like a fertilized egg. Imagine the way it happens in the human being. It happens inside in the dark. Nobody can see it. You can't see it happen. But there is a life and death difference between the ovum before and after fertilization, right? Mm-hmm. We know there is a total difference, a difference of nature. Here it is by itself afterwards. 1 second after it's fertilized, that thing is something totally different than it was before. Now, it's different because we know it's different. It doesn't look a lot different yet. But after it's fertilized, now it begins a process of dividing and growing and doing the things it does by nature, right? Mm-hmm. It does it by nature. You can never get an ovum to do the things that is doing, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, you can't get it to do it, but it will do it naturally. Now here's the thing. For 10 months, for 9 months, that is growing inside. And it is not yet perfect. You follow me? Mm-hmm. It's not finished. But it's growing for those 9-10 months. Now, we humans have developed the technology to keep a baby alive that is born way prematurely. We can keep these poor little things alive. Now, God can do the same thing, and that's what happened to the thief on the cross. He was a day old, a day after conception, but he was alive. He was fertilized. You see what I'm saying? Big difference from what happened before he gave his faith to Christ and allowed Christ to come into his heart. And God said, I started this, I can take care of it. He's alive. He can grow up in heaven. Right? Mm-hmm. But that process of growing in the womb is sanctification. The fertilization is like justification. If that fertilization holds, in other words, if the woman's body retains that fertilized egg for all that time, she will produce a perfect child. But it doesn't always happen that way, does it? Just because that egg was fertilized doesn't mean there will come out a perfect child. Sometimes something goes wrong and you lose the whole thing. When that happens, you have to start over again. And so it is with us. The justification has to hold all the way during sanctification. We must keep that connection with Christ. The Spirit must stay inside us for us to grow. Do you follow what I'm saying? So very important that we keep separate what happens when we're alone versus what happens when we have Christ in us by faith. Christ in us by faith. When you believe Jesus, He is there. Now remember this, as I'm going to finish with this, but when a woman miscarries, is it because the male chromosomes ejected themselves out of the egg? Never. Never. It's because the woman's body does something wrong. Okay? When we lose it, it's never because Jesus pulled away from us. But we have pulled away from Him. We have done something to take ourselves away from Him. So that justification, that connection with Christ has to hold all the time. Through faith, we have to keep believing and trusting Christ. Then the sanctification, then the works will happen. And that baby becomes perfect through those months in the womb of growing, but only because the egg was fertilized. Now, are you following this example? Are you following this? That your life in obedience will only, you become perfect through your connection with Christ. As long as you hold on to Jesus, the works will unfold, just like the baby becoming perfect in the womb. Okay? But there's a world of difference between an unfertilized egg and a fertilized egg. And that's what we always have to remember when we are faced with the law, when it says do this or do that. Are we alone or are we in Christ by faith? If we're alone, you can't do it. So you're never going to become faithful by any work that you can do. Reading the Bible, praying, going to church will not make you a believer. Okay?
When we look at a painting, and it's a beautiful painting, it's okay to admire the painting, but what are you really appreciating about that painting?
The creator.
It's not the painting, it's the person who painted it. And that's what a Christian is doing. Glorifying God. He's the creator. He's the one that makes Christianity happen. So the testimony is never about us and our evil selves. It's about the power of God. Okay, the fourth reason is that salvation is not only from guilt, it's also from pollution. And that's the part that's usually left out in Christian literature today. There's a deliverance from the power of sin now, but there's a deliverance from the presence of it later. There has to be a finish to this. Deliverance from the power now, and deliverance from the presence as we go on into the process. Justification by faith is through humiliation. It's the human being realizing they're totally helpless, can do nothing about salvation. So humiliation is the way we begin it, but that's not the way it ends. The other side looks different. In the sanctuary service, the process of grace covering a person is an arc from the entrance all the way to the most holy place. But that covering does not cover a person when they're judged. We are not going to go into eternity because Jesus was righteous and he was the only one. His righteousness is imputed and imparted. And in that process, we become righteous. That's right. There are people who talk about intrinsic, inherent, all those words. Don't get involved in those words. If we don't actually become righteous, then it doesn't work. God is not going to hold us up for all eternity. Do you know that the sanctuary is going to close? Why is it going to close? There's nothing more to do. You don't have to hold up people that are sinning anymore. There's going to be two groups of people when the sanctuary closes. The ones who have developed a character that's like Jesus Christ, they are righteous. And the wicked ones who don't want to be forgiven. There's nobody else. So, the fourth one is very important. We are to be delivered from the pollution of sin, where we move through actual transformation, where it really happens, where holiness is part of the life. God said something about a reward, didn't he? Well, he's not going to reward us with everlasting life because we did something. That's Jesus' work. We are going to get a reward based on our character development. Our character and our ability to stand face to face with God. That's our reward. And it'll be at different levels. We all will develop along different lines. We will all be happy with our reward. But a reward is based on the efforts and the works that were put in as a Christian. Okay, so what are the four things? The first thing that makes works necessary is duty. The second one is the reality of salvation must be shown. The third one is Jesus said we must give a testimony to others. And the fourth one was that we are to be delivered not only from guilt, but from the pollution of sin. Now, we're going to approach something here that might be a little unusual. Let's look at Romans, the 2nd chapter. This is not something that I usually get involved with, but we've been together long enough here. We can ask questions if we get in trouble. Romans 2:14. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves. Well, that's kind of interesting. There are people who are not Christians. These are Gentiles, it says. The worldling. There are people who have the law. But they don't have the law What's he saying here? Verse 15. They show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another. And so notice, there are people who are not church members. These are natural human beings. Now, what are natural human beings? They're lost, aren't they? Everybody's lost who is not in Christ. How did they get the law in their hearts? It's kind of a strange thing for people to say the law was done away with, if even Gentiles have it. Don't let anybody tell you the law was done away with. Paul is saying something here that even many Christians have not wrestled with. Let's see what he's saying here. Do you know people who are not Christians? You ever talk to any? They just flat tell you, I'm not a Christian, I don't care about that. Do they have reasoning powers?
Sure.
They do, don't they? They can think. They have minds. Where did that come from? Well, that's the way God created man, without sin. And it's kind of an interesting thing that when man sinned, God did not take away the faculties he had. He still had them. He still had a mind. He still could reason. He still had a conscience. Now, it's all bent out of shape in sin, and it's no good in sin by itself. But he still has them. All right, so what are we going to do with that? I think by now we may have learned something through our own experiences. Because we have reasoning abilities, we have certain capacities to think and to decide. We found out somewhere along the line that we can keep the law outwardly. Outwardly. A person can pick up a glass here and put it over there. They can do that as a human being. They decide it. They think it through. They can reason things out. Human beings can reason things out in their natural state. That's what Paul is trying to tell us. These natural human beings can think. And they have a law inside of them. What is that law? Well, it's not the Ten Commandments. But they do have a law. There's something that God put in there that tells them the difference between right and wrong. I want to ask you, before you were a Christian, how many people did you kill? You mean you kept that commandment and you weren't a Christian? Why didn't you kill people? Well, you knew it was wrong for one thing. You couldn't get yourself to do it for another thing. There's just lots of things. There's reasons. How come you didn't kill people? God put something in you, and you were not a Christian. Now, please get a hold of this, because what we're discussing now is pretty heavy. We're going to talk about who does obey God's way. Because it's possible to obey God outwardly so that people think you're obeying. And you might even fool yourself into thinking you're obeying God. We're talking now about the moral side of the law of God, because we can keep the law of God without morality. And I'm not saying that we can really keep the law, because only the moral use is proper. Only a Christian can be moral. Everybody else is doing outward forms. And so Paul is moving us here. What is morality? Let's define the term. I sat through a whole class in ethics and didn't hear it. Morality is a motive. It has the glory of God as its end. That's the only morality there is in the universe. The glory of God is the reason you do it. Now, obviously, Paul here is not talking about what Jeremiah was talking about. Jeremiah said, I will write my law in your inward parts. No, that's the law he writes in a Christian. This law is not in a Christian. This is a non-Christian we're talking about. God puts something in each person who's rational so that they can begin using their minds. They can discern between good and bad. Now, we have legislatures, people who make laws. Why do they make laws? So we don't kill each other off. Who made society? Well, God did. Men didn't think up society. God made society. And because we are social creatures, because we need to live with each other, even men who are not Christians understand there's a difference between bad and good. And so they make laws to try to keep things balanced out. The very fact that these non-Christians can write laws shows that they've got something that animals don't have. They've got a mind. They've got reasoning powers. And God has put something in the natural world that makes it impossible to say there is no God. People can say it, but they can't make it stick if you just look around. Where did law come from? Men can't invent them. All right, that's another side. But for now, there is power in law. And you want to know something? The laws that these men write, do you have to keep them as believers? Yes. You do, don't you? That's got to be very powerful that even believers have to keep the laws of the natural world. There's a boulevard stop out there. What are you supposed to do? What happens if you don't? You get a ticket just like the non-believers. You better be a believer and keep the law. All of them, except where they conflict with God's 10 commands He's made to you. You keep the laws because they're from Him. There's a power in law, and for people to say God did away with His law is stupidity. You can't look around in this world and not find law. Did you have a comment? If that's what the law says. You know, it's kind of interesting. I'll give you a real quick example on that one. I was invited to speak to a group of people. They're the Reformed Seventh-day Adventists. They were having a camp meeting. And so I rode to somebody else. I didn't know where this place was, and they were taking me. And on the way there, I saw people zooming by us. And I have the ability to remember cars and colors and people in the cars, things like that. And when we got to where we were going, I saw a lot of these cars parked in the lot. And so during Sabbath school, remember, this is the Reformed Seventh-day Adventist Church. These are the good guys. Yeah, they pulled out from us because we weren't good enough. They're the good guys. Well, in Sabbath school, they were talking about training the children properly. That's what the whole Sabbath school subject was about. How do we bring our children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord? How do we do this to make them creative in Christianity and all of this stuff? And they kept talking and talking. I just sat there. And finally, there was a little lull, so I raised my hand. And I said that I was in a car, and I saw several of these going by, and I said, I noticed a few of those cars in the parking lot here. And I said, were there any children in those cars as they went zooming past us? And I know we were doing the speed limit. And they said, yeah, there were children in those cars. I said, what were you teaching them? To be law keepers or to be law breakers? They knew they had a problem. It didn't help me when I got to speak later because they were gunning for me then. But we pointed out to them that they were sinners just like everybody else. All right, so The law has a power to command. Now we're going to start moving into the thought of what we're doing here today. The law has a power to command. It's the essence of law. People think the only reason for law is to condemn. No, that's not what the law is for. The law condemns transgressors, but that's their fault. The essence of law is the ability to command, the power to do that. And we're going to start talking about who God is now. Because that was the issue in the Garden of Eden. Adam misunderstood something. The command comes from God. Men can pass laws in the natural realm, but they can never pass a moral law. Only God can do that. Reason can't get you there, and I can prove that reason cannot lead you to Jesus Christ by itself. It is not possible. As a matter of fact, reason in a natural human being always becomes the enemy of God. And the more education that reason has, the worse it gets. That's right. An educated pagan is an enemy of God. The worst kind. A Christian has two kinds of commands. The one that's natural, that everybody else got, and the command of God, which the other ones don't have. How did he get that command of God? He chose it. The command was there, and he submitted to it. Submission is the creature's part of law. We have no other function except to submit to this wonderful thing that God does. We don't have time to deal with it today, but Ellen White calls it the law of love. It's love coming at us. The only way love can operate. All right. I asked a question before. I'm going to try to deal with it a little bit now. When God made Adam, what was he called, Adam? He was made in the image of God. Okay? Jesus is the express image because he wasn't just like us. Remember that. Jesus was born connected to the Father. He was the express image. He had the Spirit. Adam was made in the image of God to be tested. Where did that image of God go when he sinned? Do you know we still have it? Yes, we still have it. Horribly marred, torn up. But Luther misunderstood that one too. He thought it was all gone. No, it's not all gone. God has put something in every human so that that human passively is still the image of God with all the distortion, even though it's the enemy. It's still the image of God to be brought back. Now, I'm not saying there's anything good in humans. That's not true. There's nothing good in humans, and that's what Luther was trying to say, but he went too far. God left us with the faculties so that he could dip into them and use our minds and our reasoning powers so that he could draw us to understand what he's saying. How could we believe anything if we had no way of understanding? Yes, we start with some powers he left us. And he deals with us as his creatures that have ability to reason. And he brings evidence to us. He brings arguments to us. He brings things we have to wrestle with and deal with. And he expects us to think because we make the decision. He doesn't do that. You see, in Christianity, there are people who say Jesus does everything. Well, he does everything in terms of merit, but he doesn't do our part. He will not decide for us. This morning when you got out of bed, who got out of bed? You or God? You did it. He gave you power to do it. He gives you cells. He gives you your brains, everything to work with, but you did it. Same thing when you eat. When you eat, you're doing it. Jesus is not putting it in there. We do things. God has given us powers to do things. We are active, living creatures. Get this back.
Obedience is cooperation with God.
Yes, obedience is cooperation with God. We do it, and He does it. It's a cooperation. Now, He gives all the strength. But as meager as my part is, if I don't do my part, it won't get done. I was going to tell you a story, but I don't have time for stories now. Let's keep moving here. 1 Corinthians 2:14. It says, the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. So, the knowledge that the human has as a natural human being, these distinctions between bad and good, they're in a state of distortion. He's not seeing actual, real things the way God sees them, but he sees enough to keep his life going. He doesn't kill because he knows it's wrong and there are laws against it. He doesn't steal normally. He doesn't do lots of things. But none of this touches his spirit. He's just doing outward things so he doesn't go to jail, so he doesn't get in trouble. But he does them. Did you notice that there are human beings on this planet that do not steal? Do you think that a Christian should not steal? Well, if a non-Christian can do it, shouldn't a Christian be able to do it? Why do we think we have to steal? Somebody told us that, and it's not true. Because I know lots of people who don't go around stealing. We have abilities to do things on a gross level. Now, we are not talking spiritually here yet. I'm talking at the gross outside level that anybody can see. We have power not to do those things. I don't have to throw a glass of milk at you because I'm a sinner. Okay? So I have something. I have a capacity to be enlightened. God gives me that capacity as a rational human being. Truth is received by faith, not by reason. Now get this. We're going to start making a shift here. Truth is received by faith. As God makes these things reasonable to us, we must make a decision here, not based on reason alone. We have to take some leaps. Reason makes use of the faith and the truth that we have then given to us of God. So reason is important, but it doesn't make us spiritual. It can't do that. God appeals to it so that we can demonstrate some faith. That reason that God has given each of us is an instrument of faith. All right, I have to move from there now. Humanists have gone a different direction with all of this. They say that reason is the ultimate judge.
Like in France.
And in all philosophy, that's what happens. The human mind judges everything. And the more educated a person gets, the worse it gets for them. They think they can judge everything. But that is not the Spirit of God. Human beings do not judge God. They don't judge truth. They receive it through faith. Reason is used by God to exhibit divine truth to us. It becomes reasonable to a level where faith can work with it.
Let me say that sentence again. If you want to make sense, if you think you will do what God says when it makes sense to you, you will never do what God says. If you believe what God says, then it will make sense to you. You follow what I'm saying? Reasoning is a way that we figure out in our brains, does this make sense? And if we ask reason first, when we read the Bible and we see that God says to do something, and if we stop and say, does this make sense? Do I understand this? We are judging God based on our reason.
The Sabbath is a good example of that.
Right. We will not understand something until we make the decision to believe God. A blanket decision, as it were writing God a blank check. We sign the check of our mind, hand it to God, and say, you fill it out. In other words, we are making the decision almost like you do when you marry someone, that you say you're going to trust them. Now, you trust them because you said you were going to trust them. You don't start analyzing their behavior and deciding if you're going to trust them now. You say you're going to trust them, and then you trust them. Now, humans aren't worthy of blank checks, but this is the way it works with God. We have to say, I'm deciding to trust God. Now, isn't that what God asked in the garden? He said, you don't understand why you're not supposed to eat of this tree. All I'm going to tell you is, don't eat of this tree.
Just trust me.
Trust me. And that's what he asked. Now, he could have sat down, he could have showed them a scenario and said, now, this could happen if you did, and he could have made it all reasonable to them. That wasn't going to work, because if you've got to prove yourself to someone, then you're always on probation. Right? If you've got to prove yourself, you're always on probation. God can't have it that way. We have to believe him, and then it becomes reasonable. Okay? After we believe him, everything makes sense.
People can acquire truth through nature, that is, through the things that they can see. In Hebrews 11:3, it says, through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God. So by faith the Christian knows that God made the worlds. But if you talk to people, they know the world didn't come out by itself. It came from someplace. It was made somehow. They've been educated to think false things through evolution and so forth, but they still have it in their mind somewhere. This was made someplace, sometime. It came from somewhere. Those are the kinds of things humans can know without the revelation of God. They know certain basic factors. All right, I want to get back to Adam now and show what happened. In Genesis 2, verse 16. And this is where I take an issue with some of the modern translations of the Bible. They think that the words unbelief and disobedience are interchangeable. I don't happen to believe that. Verse 16, it says, the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. Now, the man naturally knew that it was wrong to steal. He knew it was wrong to kill. He knew lots of things. God put that in him. But this is different. He did not know he was not supposed to eat from that particular tree until God said so. And so now law takes a turn here. It becomes very personal. A being has spoken, the supreme being. And it is not a request, it is a command. Okay? To this man. And this man now must relate to that particular command in a whole different way than everything else he knows about the universe. He knows things are right out there and what things he can do. But this one comes from God only. Why did God do this? He was not testing the man to see if he could believe or not. He believed lots of things already. He was testing the love of the human being to see if he would obey based on love. And what a simple test. Stay away from my tree. I mean, I know man could have lived for billions of years without ever messing with a tree. Didn't need to. But we know the story how it happened. It was not just unbelief that caused the problem in this world. It was disobedience. He disobeyed, and the whole human race disobeyed in him. There are theologians who get all upset in our church over that. They say, oh, you're saying original sin. No, I'm not saying original sin. I'm saying he did the original sin for mankind. And Ellen White says that 4 times. He did the original sin. Now, obviously, what he did is not for me to be saved or lost. That's up to my choice. But he did do the original sin, and he took me down with him. He disobeyed. The issue is obedience or disobedience. He was perfect when he disobeyed. All right, let's move towards our close here. How did he get a chance to do that? A heavy thing called freedom of the will. God made his intelligent creatures free, like himself. God is free. He is not bound to anything. He is free. The reason I say that is scholastics people down through the years have said that even God has to keep the laws. He can't get outside of them. Well, they're not understanding something. If he was bound in that way, he would never be able to intervene in anyone's lives. There would be a principle that says you can't get involved with them that way. They have to get what everybody else gets. But God does intervene. It's one of his attributes. It's called mercy. All right, so freedom of will is very important. We were made to be like him. But man, after he sinned, still had a certain freedom of will. The one we have been describing as natural law. He has the ability to choose whether that glass sits here or over here, whether this book goes on this pile or that pile, whether he wants to kill or not. He can choose certain things. I'm not talking about his power to do things. I'm talking about choices he makes. He can think things through reasoning. He has no capacity in one area, though, because he's a sinner. That is in the moral realm. He is absolutely helpless. His will is totally in bondage and slavery to sin without Jesus Christ. So people can decide to do certain things correctly, and outwardly it looks good. But the question is this being done through natural law or because they're a Christian? That's right. He cannot choose to obey from love to God. He can obey out of love to an idea or to a person. He thinks, but it's selfishness. Do you know that most people get married because they're selfish? That's why there's so many divorces. The people found out afterwards. That's where divorces come from, is this selfishness. When a person says, I love you, what they're really saying is, I feel romantic. Yeah, they feel romantic. What happens when the romantic is gone? See you later, I'm going to the golf game. I'm going bowling. No, real love comes after you're married. Do you know that? That's what God says. That's what the Spirit of prophecy says. Real love grows when you get to know each other and live with each other and develop, and you come together and you form bonds that nobody else can have. You learn to love each other after you're married. So when a person says, I'm a Christian, oh, I feel so good about it, oh, I love Jesus, and they say it all day long, I love Jesus, I love Jesus, and you ask them, well, what about the law? Oh, that's bad, that's done away with. How can a person say they love Jesus and not love his law? Our high calling, page 138, says the law is an expression of God's mind. But I can't stand his mind. It's just strange how we talk as humans. But God allows it because of freedom of will. He has to move with us. He tries to reach our reasoning powers. He deals with that potential. And it's always there, that potential for us to hear him and respond to him and try to learn his way. Man has a power to refrain from gross sin. And I'm talking about non-Christians. If we can get this understood, we probably can get past a line to understand that if non-Christians have a power not to commit gross sin, certainly Christians should.
Paul said that before he was converted, he had kept all the law.
Paul, yeah, how did Paul talk? Before he became a Christian on that Damascus road, what did he think of himself?
He was a doctor.
What did other people think of him? Yes, oh, Paul, Pharisee of the Pharisees, doctor of the law, never did anything wrong, and he didn't. But he wasn't a Christian. So don't get yourself all confused and saying that only Christians can do things that look outwardly right. It's not true. We might fool ourselves thinking, I'm doing this because of the glory of God. Am I? Or am I doing it because I want to do it? Who told me to do it? Who is it helping? Paul says, whatever you do, whatever you eat, you drink, whatever you do it to the glory of God. In the plan of salvation, where did Jesus begin? After living that perfect life as a child. A child. The Spirit sent him out into the wilderness. Jesus didn't choose to go out there. The Spirit led him out there. And the Spirit made the devil come there too. The devil had no choices that day. He was there to deal with Jesus. It was a contest that had to be dealt with. What was the first thing that happened? Jesus had to start at the window. Adam took all that beautiful world, that pristine world, and compressed it down. And he sinned. Boop, and all that came through was him, the little sinner. Nothing else came through. Jesus focused the entire plan of salvation down to that window. That little space right there where Adam did it. And what Adam did, Jesus undid. Appetite. Adam ate something, and Jesus said, I refuse to eat it. You see? The whole plan of salvation comes down right there to that little place. Why do you think God raised up Seventh-day Adventists? It's to teach people the real plan. And what was the first thing he gave us as a people? The health message. The first thing. It was the first vision she received after we organized as a church in the month of June. It's not an option. It's not an alternative. It is the core basis of who we are as a people. So Adam can instruct us in a whole lot of things here. What is obedience? It's relating to the humble God, the lowly one. He's the lowly one, the one who bends to his creation, the one that says, learn of me, I'm meek and lowly. And he says, I have the right to command, but it's for you to choose. This is what I say. Will you be in fellowship with me or not? And we can choose either way. We have freedom of choice, but it's more than that. The Spirit is there to pull us, and the Spirit is there to give us power. God hasn't left anything out of this. Hebrews 11:6. Without faith, what's it say? Without faith, it's impossible to please God. So until we get over to that faith place, nothing's going to happen. We must believe that Jesus really is our Savior. We must have that basic faith that justifies us through His merits alone. We must approach God without any walls, no barriers. Ephesians 5:1 tells us that Jesus is our peace. Everything's gone between us and God. We've got to stop thinking about God as somebody we have to appease and placate and do things or we're going to get in trouble. Ellen White, I read a statement today. She said, why do people think of God as some sort of a tyrant? He's our Father, our loving Father. So God makes an appeal to the mind. If a person says it's impossible to keep the law of God, it's impossible on the moral level. It is impossible for a non-born-again person to be moral. To the glory of God. That's how the Reformers lived, you know that? It took me a long while to figure out how could God save these people all thinking different things theologically. I mean, Luther's over here, Calvin's over here, Zwingli's over there, Knox is over there. So how could God have all these people as Reformers when they were all saying different things in these areas? There was one place they all agreed. To the glory of God. And I'm sure He honored them because they honored Him that way. God is not interested in whether we're good theologians or not. How many pages of the Spirit of Prophecy we can quote. The impossibility is the moral one. And who brought on the moral impossibility? Did God do that? No. Man does it to himself. Shall I prove that? The human agent delights to sin. Why would a person do it if they didn't? They have a desire for it. We must be as active in receiving salvation. God doesn't sin in us. He never will. He does not help us sin. How can we do it without the power of God? We do it, don't we? We need to be that active in righteousness. The same kind of activity, the same kind of power. Without being the cause of our salvation, we are active. In times past, we've talked about repentance, we've talked about faith, we've talked about some of these elements. I just want to remind you that Paul told us, how will a man know if he doesn't hear? Yeah. God expects us to hear, to know what He's saying, so we can respond and be active and do something. Not just to sit there like a lump and say, well, Jesus did it all. So, where are we? We've made a circle here. We are justified by faith through the merits of Jesus alone. That's our salvation. But that salvation is going somewhere. That is an active, living faith that works by love and purifies the soul. Okay? So don't try to make yourself pure. You're never going to get it done. Learn how to have faith. God will start working you in the rest of it, because we aren't talking about that today, how He does these things. But He works us. We don't work Him. And we have to relax and let Him work us so that we can become the active agents He wants us to become. There are reasons why we don't do it, and I'll name you a big one. The word is doubt. The devil is good at giving us things to doubt about what God says. And of course, we never doubt the power of God. We always say, I can't do it. That's not God's fault. I can't do it. Yes, it's God's fault. If He can't get you to do it, it's His fault. If you don't believe Him, that's your fault. But don't say He can't do it. He said He can. And He even says how He's going to respond to you saying He can't, because you're no good. He says, you're calling me a liar. And somehow I don't think even God takes that kindly, calling Him a liar. I want to read something. Ministry of Healing. 159, starting around in there. $158. I'm going to skip around here. It says, in all our associations, it should be remembered that in the experiences of others are chapters sealed from mortal sight. On the pages of memory are sad histories that are sacredly guarded from curious eyes. There stand registered long, hard battles with trying circumstances, perhaps troubles in the home life, that day by day weaken courage, confidence, and faith. Those who are fighting the battle of life at great odds may be strengthened and encouraged by little attentions that cost only a loving effort. To such, the strong, helpful grasp of the hand by a true friend is worth more than gold or silver. Words of kindness are as welcome as the smile of angels. Ever thought that you could be to a person like the smile of an angel? Yeah. This is a call to remember we are not alone in the universe trying to get saved. Jesus has done that for us. We need to get busy and figure out how to live in it to help somebody else. And this is one of those little ways here. And this is Ministry of Healing. I'm going to read a couple other little places here. I'm going to read extensively in the next chapter. It says, not because we first loved Him did Christ love us, but while we were yet sinners, He died for us. He does not treat us according to our desert, although our sins have merited condemnation. He does not condemn us. Year after year, He has borne with our weakness and ignorance, with our ingratitude and waywardness. Notwithstanding our wanderings, our hardness of heart, our neglect of His holy word, His hand is stretched out still. Grace is an attribute of God exercised toward undeserving human beings. Do I get some? It says for undeserving. I know that one for sure. We did not seek for it, but it was sent in search of us. God rejoices to bestow His grace upon us, not because we are worthy, but because we are so utterly unworthy. Our only claim to His mercy is our great need. Do you want to ever get to a place where you don't need that mercy? Why do we try? I need the mercy now, I needed it then, and I'm going to continue to need it. I will never be able to step out from that. I will never become worthy. My righteousness will be a reflection of Christ. The only righteousness I will ever be able to relate to. All right, continuing. The Lord God, through Jesus Christ, holds out his hand all day long in invitation to the sinful and fallen. All day long. He will receive all. Does anybody want to say that statement's not true? He will. That's the end of it. He will receive all. He welcomes all. It is his glory to pardon the chief of sinners. And please don't think that's who you are, or you really have a lot of pride in you. You're not that good. This says the chief of sinners. He will take the prey from the mighty. He will deliver the captive. He will pluck the brand from the burning. He will lower the golden chain of his mercy to the lowest depths of human wretchedness and lift up the debased soul contaminated with sin. Every human being is the object of loving interest to him who gave his life that he might bring men back to God. Souls guilty and helpless, liable to be destroyed by the arts and snares of Satan, are cared for as a shepherd cares for the sheep of his flock. The Savior's example is to be the standard of our service for the tempted and the erring. Oh. So it's just not about me getting all the compassion from God. It's him trying to get me to understand he wants to use me that way with other people. Rich and poor, high and low, free and bond are God's heritage. He who gave his life to redeem man sees in every human being a value that exceeds finite computation. Can you think of some humans that you might not put that value on? Have you bumped into any? I've seen some pretty scuzzy people in some interesting places. Jesus says we can't put a value on them. We can't think that high. In the book Education, she gives us a little hint. You know, there was $48 million worth of gold on the boards on the three sides of the sanctuary. Just the boards, nothing else. Then there were all those silver sockets. And then there was a silver on top of the pillars and all the brass. And the pillars of gold. The utensils. I mean, there was money there. And she says God did this to show the worth of the human soul. Yeah. God uses all those treasures just to make a building. To symbolize us. The worth of a human soul. We need more Christ-like sympathy, not merely sympathy for those who appear to us to be faultless, but sympathy for poor, suffering, struggling souls who are often overtaken in fault, sinning, and repenting, tempted and discouraged. We are to go to our fellow men touched like our merciful high priest with the feelings of their infirmities. I invite you to read this chapter sometime. I'm not going to read it all. I just want to read a few sections here. We should strive to understand the weakness of others. We know little of the heart trials of those who have been bound in chains of darkness and who lack resolution and moral power. Most pitiable is the condition of him who is suffering under remorse. He is as one stunned, staggering, sinking into the dust. He can see nothing clearly. The mind is beclouded. He knows not what steps to take. Many a poor soul is misunderstood, unappreciated, full of distress and agony, a lost, strange sheep. He cannot find God. Yet he has an intense longing for pardon and peace. Oh, let no word be spoken to cause deeper pain to the soul weary of a life of sin, but knowing not where to find relief. Present the compassionate Savior. Take him by the hand, lift him up, speak to him words of courage and hope. Help him to grasp the hand of the Savior. And that might not say a lot to you, but it just jumps out at me. I wrote a statement one day. I couldn't hardly believe it. She says, God takes the hand of the sinner and places it in the hand of Christ. Yeah. And notice what she just said here. Help him to grasp the hand of the Savior. We take the place of God. It takes a while to put all these together, but they're there, these little sentences. We become too easily discouraged over the souls who do not at once respond to our efforts. Never should we cease to labor for a soul while there is one gleam of hope. Precious souls cost our self-sacrificing Redeemer too dear a price to be lightly given up to the tempter's power. We need to put ourselves in the place of the tempted ones. Consider the power of heredity. Is that real or isn't it? Yeah. The influence of evil associations and surroundings, the power of wrong habits. Can we wonder that under such influences many become degraded? Can we wonder that they should be slow to respond to efforts for their uplifting? Often, when won to the gospel, those who appeared coarse and unpromising would be among its most loyal adherents and advocates. They are not altogether corrupt. Luther needed to hear that one. They are not altogether corrupt. Beneath the forbidding exterior, there are good impulses that might be reached. Where did those come from? See, God put them there, that natural law we talked about. Without a helping hand, many would never recover themselves, but by patient, persistent effort, they may be uplifted. Such need tender words, kind consideration, tangible help. That's active. They need that kind of counsel which will not extinguish the faint gleam of courage in the soul. Let the workers who come in contact with them consider this. Okay, I'm going to close this now. This last little paragraph, to me, is just loaded with things. Some will be found whose minds have been so long debased that they will never in this life become what under more favorable circumstances they might have been. But the bright beams of the Sun of Righteousness may shine into the soul. It is their privilege to have the life that measures with the life of God. Did you catch that? We're talking about the lowest of the low that we can think about, and she says they can have a life that measures with the life of God. Plant in their minds uplifting, ennobling thoughts. Let your life make plain to them the difference between vice and purity, darkness and light. In your example, let them read what it means to be a Christian. Christ is able to uplift the most sinful and place them where they will be acknowledged as children of God, joint heirs with Christ to the immortal inheritance. By the miracle of divine grace, many may be fitted for lives of usefulness. Despised and forsaken, they have become utterly discouraged. They may appear stoical and stolid, but under the ministration of the Holy Spirit, the stupidity that makes their uplifting appear so hopeless will pass away. The dull, clouded mind will awake. The slave of sin will be set free. Vice will disappear and ignorance will be overcome. Through the faith that works by love, the heart will be purified and the mind enlightened. Now, I don't think any of us have sunk as low as she described here yet. But if God includes these, certainly He includes all of us. He hasn't left anybody in this room out. He means for all of us to be with Him in His kingdom. He's taken care of it. He's paid for it. It's up to us to become grateful and say thank you in a way that counts. So it's a joy to submit to a Father like this. A joy to submit. Okay, that will close us for today. Shall we have prayer? Father, we thank you that you didn't shut the door on us. It's open. The ark is still drying and is still pulling people in. We thank you that you've called us, that we've seen what it means to be a Seventh-day Adventist. Help us to understand the privilege it is to be a Christian in this age. We thank you that all the power is there. Everything that you have promised is available. Help us, Lord, to understand what you're saying to us. Help us to stop looking at ourselves. The more we do that, the worse things get. Help us to look to Jesus, to find out that there's somebody there really to love. And as our attention is focused on Him, He will bring us things that will help us to see how foolish the desires we once had really are. They don't go anywhere. They just go to sickness, disease, death. Help us to see that only your plan carries with it any kind of health. Bless us, Lord, as we open our minds and hearts. You saved our faculties for us. We have reasoning powers. Speak to us. Make us willing to hear. And when we do, Jesus will say to us what He's always said, let him who has ears hear what the Spirit says. To hear is to obey. We thank you, Lord, that you're going to take each one of us there. You've paid for each one. Help us to know what it means to cooperate with you. Help us, Lord, to get past the stupidity, as you pointed out in this quotation, that makes us so ignorant. The things that we think are so important, that we desire them, when you say they're no good. Help us to realize finally that you are all wise, that you are all loving, that you would not tell us something unless it was true. Bless us, Lord, that we may be among that host that will be waiting when Jesus comes. May we have that home that you've promised us. May we visualize even now where we're going to be billions of years from now, and some of the angels that we'll be talking to. We thank you in Jesus' precious name. Amen.